you need to understand, not just the crime, but also what rehabilitative efforts has somebody gone through maybe since that time to really fairly assess the background check and make an informed hiring decision.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Now, we learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show. And of course, the added bonus is you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact: Mustafa Suleyman, ex-Google researcher, CEO of Inflection AI and venture partner at Greylock, wrote recently in the MIT Technology Review that we need a new Turing test that would see if AI can make $1 million on its own. The current Turing test, as you may know, first proposed by famed computer scientist Alan Turing in 1950, challenges machines to imitate humans in ways that confuse humans. Google commercialized the pursuit in 2018 with its Duplex, the system nobody asked for, that tricks merchants into letting bots book restaurant reservations and haircuts. Some say today's LLMs are already capable of passing the Turing test. Suleyman, a respected researcher and influential AI observer, missed an opportunity here to propose a test that would benefit humanity. We should be challenging machines to cure cancer, end hunger, or reduce global warming. It's an insult to even consider the pinnacle of machine intelligence to be making $1 million. My challenge to everyone listening: think about what your modern Turing test would be. I sure hope you'll dream way bigger than Mustafa Suleyman, and I encourage you to share any of your thoughts. And Mustafa, if you're listening, big fan, please join me on the podcast to defend your position. It would be an interesting conversation. As always, we'll link to the full article in today's show notes. But now shifting to this week's conversation. Anyone who has ever hired a new employee knows how important and broken the background check process is. The experience is awful for candidates and employers. Plus, it's inherently unfair for underrepresented and non-traditional candidates. Just imagine a world where hiring the best people is easier and faster, and all forms of verification data are provided automatically from trusted sources. Today's guest is making that vision a reality. This is one of the most obvious beneficial AI use cases I've seen. Denise Hemke is the Chief Product Officer at Checkr, the amazing company making employee screening more fair for everyone. Checkr has raised nearly $700 million since its founding in 2014. Denise heads up product management, design, and program management after having served in various leadership roles at Workday, including most recently as the GM for analytics. Denise is also the San Francisco chapter lead for the excellent organization, Products That Count, started by friend of the podcast, SC Moati. And without further ado, Denise, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about your background and how you got into this space.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate you having me here today. I'm super excited to be here. A little bit about me. I spent my first decade in engineering. I worked at companies like AT&T, HSBC, and Salesforce. I like to say making my way to California. And then I really spent the next decade of my career in product. You mentioned some of the places, Workday, obviously here at Checkr, but also for a small big data analytics company, Platform, which is actually acquired by Workday. That's how I made my way there. So really great experiences. And when I think about it, I fell in love with product, honestly, because it was the best of both worlds, right? It was this opportunity to go out and to really understand customer problems, and then to ultimately partner with cross-functional teams, design, engineering, and those folks in go-to-market to really launch those products to solve for these challenges that I was hearing for customers. And so really satisfied kind of both of these itches that I had, to design and build great things, but also really be on the forefront of identifying the customer need. And I like to say that I fell in love with HR tech, as I truly believe people are our greatest asset. I'm a woman, and having historically been in engineering, it wasn't always easy. And I will say maybe it still isn't easy for many. And I worked in technical areas where I was often the only woman in the room. So needless to say, I wanted to build an environment where there were a lot more people like me contributing. And I like to say, for my daughter's sake, she's 6 right now, but she'll be in the workforce someday, that I want that for every company. And so I had this incredible opportunity to launch an application called People Analytics at Workday. And part of that product really highlighted where there was diversity gaps. So I felt like I was getting to make a dent on the problem. And fast forward now to Checkr, right? And one of the reasons why, I was interested in this incredible opportunity at Checkr is the challenge is, how do we bring fairness and the hiring process to help more people get to work faster? And this mission is a little bit different than the mission that I identified with People Analytics. But at the end of the day, they both are a mission, right? And they're both something where I can look at myself in the mirror and start to say, I'm not just building software, right? I'm doing my part to make this world a little bit better, even if it is a small part in the grand scheme of things. And that's something I can be proud of, for my daughter and for, everybody else that we're leaving this world to as the future comes.
I talk a lot about my 2 girls. They're 13 and 15, and the world that I want to create for them. And I talk about frequently my why. The reason I'm on this planet is to help 1 billion employees have better work lives. And that feeds into what we do at People Reign. And I love hearing that that's part of your why at Checkr and then previously at Workday. So as an employer, I mentioned in the opener how broken I know the background check process to be. It always just seems like a compliance task. I never feel like there's actually value in the content or that I'm actually getting accurate information. Starting with that, talk to me about the founding vision for Checkr and where do you even start? It's so broken in so many ways. How do you fix it?
You're not wrong, but I think we're really fixing it from the inside out. But I'll rewind the clock, right? So background checks, to your point, have always been this idea of we're going to screen out the bad guys, right? That's been sort of the perception. We're trying to screen people out. And Daniel Yannis, our founder and CEO, one of our founders and CEO, he was actually working at a gig company as an engineer, trying to integrate to a background check company. And that's where his frustration began, right? Was not even this piece about, fairness or how do we, bring more fairness, but how do I simply integrate this so that I can easily hire the talent that I need? And so that's where he started. But as he really built the company with his co-founder, it really was, he stumbled upon this problem by trying to understand, what is happening here and what does the future of work actually look like? And he really discovered this bigger challenge of this lack of fairness, this screening individuals out. And oftentimes it's marginalized groups that are disproportionately affected by this lack of fairness. And for me, I also like to think about, the challenges that we're having in today's economy and in today's workforce, right? I probably spend more time in the jobs report than probably one should. But if you look at the US in particular, we are seeing a shrinking workforce in the under 55 segment, right? We are not back to pre-pandemic rates of labor force participation. And so fairness is certainly critical for the social good and for building strong communities. Absolutely, that should pull at our heartstrings, and we should want to make the world a better place and a more fair place. But it's not just about the social good, right? It is also a very real economic challenge where we don't have the workforce that we need. And so how do we tap into the worker population that is continually overlooked, right? I do not believe we're going to be able to automate ourselves or immigrate ourselves out of this problem, fast enough. And so we do need to look to those individuals who continuously get overlooked. And I think that is a way that Checkr can help. And it really is our vision to build fairness into the systems and the processes throughout the worker life cycle. And so I think starting first with background checks, of course, a critical piece of this is enabling our customers to hire efficiently and to do that in a way that still yields trust and compliance. But when I say, throughout the life cycle of the employee or the worker, I'm talking even beyond background checks. And so Checkr is already outside of background checks today. And so I want to just highlight a few examples of what we're doing outside of that space. So one of them is Checkr onboarding, which helps improve the onboarding of candidates and really provides a low code or no code experience to help aid in that onboarding process, helping especially gig companies to get access to the talent they need faster. And then the second thing is Checkr Pay, which is ultimately about paying workers. And both of these also, have this element of fairness built in, right? Checkr onboarding uses our background check service as one of those key steps in the onboarding process, number one. And if you think about Checkr Pay, I like to think about the driver who needs to go out and do some work to get paid so that they can put gas in their car, right, to do some more work. And the reality of it is many payments companies today are taking a big cut of what that person would earn. And that's tough, right? That's really tough. And I think, we think about it, right? We can think about that driver who needs the intraday payments and needs every single dollar. But I like to really put a real world example to it. Whenever I'm in the back of an Uber or a Lyft, I love to engage with the drivers, right? It's this incredible opportunity. It's the product person in me, I guess. It's this incredible opportunity to understand and really to help build empathy, because those individuals are our Checkr candidates too, right? They are our Checkr customers too. And I was recently talking to a driver who left his job 40 weeks away from his company or away from his family, working for this company, to take a job as a driver, right? Doing ride sharing. And what that has enabled him is financial or some freedom, right? Freedom and flexibility in his life. He's got 4 kids and, he's now getting back an inordinate amount of time to spend with his family. But I will tell you, for that man who is spending that time with his family, every single one of those dollars counts. And so when you're talking about paying him, he needs that full paycheck, right? And if you think about, Checkr Pay, we are giving him the full paycheck. We are not saying, hey, we're going to take a big cut of this because we know that you need to get, food on the table to your family at night. And so I think that's taking it kind of from this theoretical and really putting it into a real world, like what does it mean to an individual who's dealing with this every single day? And that's how Checkr is helping, right? Not just from background checks, but all the way through that worker life cycle.
I missed the economics of Checkr Pay. Who is not getting the money that is now instead going to the gig worker?
So who's not getting the money? So a lot of the way that we're able to make this business model work is really a lot of the interchange fees, right? And so that's what's behind the scenes, making this an offer.
Checkr is essentially a bank.
Checkr is kind of functioning as a bank, certainly in this world. And we're able to take money off of those fees instead of saying, hey, let's take it from the worker themselves.
I see. So the worker gets the money up front, and then eventually the gig agency is going to repay Checkr in the form of fees.
Gig agency, or actually even the interchange from using things like a Checkr Pay card. I have a Checkr Pay card. I can go out and use that to make, same day purchases or immediate purchases. And it's really that interchange that is what's able to really fund this business model so that we can give 100% to the worker.
One of the things that gives the background check space a black eye is that unfairness is often created by arcane rules related to, if you have a prison record, then, automatically you're rejected, and things that just aren't a good reflection of the worth of people or the value that they might bring to an organization. Now, Checkr is introducing technology to further automate the process of worker selection. What are your thoughts on how do you use the Checkr platform to reduce and not introduce more bias into the system?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say you're right. Traditional background checks are pretty binary, right? They are pass or fail. So the incentive is really for the employer to only hire people who have nothing on their background check, screening a bunch of people out. In contrast, and maybe one other data point I should highlight for you, I mentioned before our philosophy is to screen people in. It's because 1 in 3 Americans has some form of a criminal record. If you only offer pass or fail outcomes, you are artificially limiting to a much, much smaller pool of individuals. And so there's 3 ways that I like to highlight that really show how is Checkr doing something differently? How are we really thinking about screening people in and not introducing that bias? So first and foremost, we encourage our customers to consider qualified candidates with records, and we'll allow our customers to actually filter out the data that isn't relevant to the role, right? So that is really powerful. And it's not something that we impose a set of rules. We offer, a rules-based engine where you are basically encoding your company policies. We like to think of nature, time, nature, right? What is the nature of the crime? What is the time? And what's the nature of the role? So for example, if marijuana possession charges are irrelevant to the job that you're hiring for, automatically screen those, findings out so that bias never enters the equation. And you can ensure that you're remaining compliant, right? You're treating everybody fairly, equally, and in line with your company policies, because ultimately you're putting your policies into place. And next, I think the other thing is, jurisdictions, as we all know, right? And the way that they report on crime is really fragmented. They use different language to describe the same criminal offenses and charges. And so what that can lead to is a lot of confusion for the employer, right? And you think about, especially that SMB, a small business who's not doing this every single day, right? They may be less familiar with a lot of this terminology because they may hire pretty infrequently. And so what Checkr does is we normalize that language and standardize that charge data. And we use machine learning to do that so that, the language is much more clear so employers can make fair hiring decisions and they aren't, operating on a misunderstanding or bringing some bias about the charge into the equation. And then lastly, I'll say also traditional background checks don't really allow the opportunity to bring in additional context or discussion about a criminal history. You need to understand, not just the crime, but also what rehabilitative efforts has somebody gone through maybe since that time to really fairly assess the background check and make an informed hiring decision, right? So a great example or story that I like to tell, and this is a real story. So let's call, this woman Sue. Sue has a daughter with mental illness. And it could be that in a battle of trying to deal with her daughter, going through an episode, the police get called and ultimately she gets arrested and that inhibits her to get a job. In that case, we're not even talking about rehabilitation, right? We're talking about, a series of unfortunate circumstances that this person has been subject to, but it may look like an assault charge, or it may look like a battery charge, or whatever ultimately she gets charged with. And so what we at Checkr do is offer a product called Candidate Stories so that, you can engage with the individual and understand, okay, this is what happened with Sue. She can supply associated documentation. So again, we're not bringing that bias of what we believe, Sue has done or not done into the conversation, right? And I think all 3 of these examples just kind of highlight that Checkr is starting from a fundamentally different place. Right? We're starting from a place of we want to help you hire the right talent for the role without sacrificing trust or compliance. And how can we do that and make that as quick and easy as possible?
As AI technologists, we always have to think about both call it the false positive and the false negative problem. And so far, we've been mostly rightfully talking about the false negative problem where a good candidate gets overlooked and the ways Checkr addresses that. But certainly as parents, we also, have to think about background checking, preventing candidates who could, potentially put other employees at risk from being hired. I know there's only so much that Checkr can do in terms of defending the automated decisions, but in your place as a leader of the company, how do you think about the responsibility of Checkr to do both, kind of mitigate both risks?
Yeah, and I think you're right to call it out. Like both risks are important, and again, as a mother, right, and you just even as a human being, I think we have to take both of the things in the balance. I will say we don't automate. We can maybe talk about this next. We don't automate that decisioning process because we think that should be individualized and personal and done by humans and not machines, right? But the other thing that I do think of in terms of like helping to make sure that the right things are happening or that we are surfacing the things that matter is, one of the things that we use AI to solve for is really improving identity matching, right? That, is something that really helps make sure that are we finding the right individual and are we really bringing back all of the relevant charges so that you as an employer can make the right hiring decision. And so, yes, we want to encourage people to be educated about, the criminal process. We want them to think about things like the rule I mentioned before, the time nature, and trying to make sure that we're, taking the relevance of the crime into account for the role. But it is our job, right, to bring maximum possible accuracy. And we are governed by FCRA to do this, to bring maximum possible accuracy and surface all of that information. Because at the end of the day, our customers, also don't want to sacrifice trust, right? They want to make sure that they're making an eyes wide open choice and they're making that choice based on what's right for their business and their customers.
So I love that integrity is at the core of Checkr. And as I was learning about the company's background, and I got really interested in the approach, the ethics behind what you do. We talk a lot about the ethics of AI on the show. So in light of that, I'm curious to get your perspective on how AI should be regulated. You referred to one way where there's some governance introduced into what you do, but it's a hotly debated topic in AI communities. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I will at least say for Checkr, I don't know if I can speculate for the industry as a whole, but for Checkr, right, we are governed by Consumer Reporting Agency, right? I mentioned, FCRA. FCRA stands for the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And there are also, comparable state laws that we are governed by as well. So compliance with FCRA and those local laws is built into our product. And I think, you have to look industry by industry and say, is there a similar parallel? And if not, should there be? But so I'm not, a general policy expert broadly in this area, but like I said, our belief is really that when it comes to hiring, right, you're talking about people's lives, their livelihood, their ability to put food on the table, that ultimately these decisions should be personalized. When it comes to background checks and deciding to hire somebody, they should be individualized by the candidate. We can certainly automate a lot, and we do, but we have a moral obligation to ensure fairness and that, hiring decisions should really be made by humans and not the machines.
I'm not familiar with FCRA, but does it include the rights of the candidate who has been rejected by AI to understand what data was used to make that decision?
Yeah, so it does, and I would say it's not rejected by AI. It is, us surfacing the charges, and then the company decides are they going to reject it or not. But FCRA does give candidates the right to dispute what they believe is either incomplete or inaccurate information, right? And so we have an easy disputes process to help the candidates with that. And when there are any potential inaccuracies, we take that seriously and we promptly investigate and remediate these when appropriate, right? Because at the end of the day, this is human lives that we're talking about. So we take that absolutely seriously. And that is a part of the FCRA regulations.
We've been talking about the ethics of AI and regulation, but as a chief product officer, every day you're faced with probably 10 new opportunities, of which you can probably only pick one. And by the way, every one that you pick is going to be scrutinized. How do you think about prioritization in your role?
Wow. Prioritization is a long topic, but I will say that, for us, we first start with what are we trying to achieve as a company, right? What is our mission? What is our vision? And therefore, what are the goals that we are, have laid out for us that, for ourselves this year that we are trying to achieve? And so first and foremost, that takes precedence. I'll say one of our top goals, just as a highlight, is really about customer delight, right? How can we make sure that, customers are really using Checkr, getting the value that they want and expect from Checkr, and making sure that we're fulfilling that customer need. And so there's a lot, obviously, that kind of can ladder up to that. And so we have to decide within that. Of course, there's also, things that we think about in terms of, what commitments have we made to specific customers as a product leader? Obviously not the thing that I love to do the most. Ideally we're solving the needs for the greatest number of customers. But we will sometimes, pull ahead things that, we believe are broadly applicable, but there's a customer sort of driving that request. And then really, beyond that, it's just kind of double clicking back into those opportunities to say, what are the things that, yes, can meet the greatest customer need that can also produce business outcomes, right? Because if you are serving the customer well and they are delighted, then they will pay for those products. And so the question is, what has the highest revenue potential when we think about that? Or conversely, what can help us on the bottom line, right? What is going to provide us the most savings? I like to say this is the year of efficiency, or maybe this is the year that brought our focus back to efficiency in this industry. And so we can't just think about growth. We also have to think about, how do we, continually improve our product margins? And I think every product leader is thinking about those same things right now.
At least you and Mark Zuckerberg. At the very least, the two of you. Hey, Denise, I know the time has flown by, but we're about out of time, but you're not getting off the hot seat without answering one last question for me. So you spent a good chunk of your career at a legendary culture for leaders, Workday. We share a bunch of friends in common. I've been in and around the Workday culture and really respect everybody who grew up in that leadership culture. What are the lessons that you've taken out of Workday and perhaps even Platform before, but into Checkr that you felt have helped you grow as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I think about Workday, paramount to Workday is like customer centricity, right? Incredible customers that, would spend time with you, really even engage with each other, right? To ensure that best practices are happening across the industry. And so I truly consider myself lucky to have worked for, such an incredible company, and an incredible company that has built such an incredible customer base. And so I think that is certainly first and foremost to me. A part of that, obviously, my role as general manager there is really driving for results, right? And that is something, if you look at Checkr's core values, one of our core values is ownership. And that is something that we look for in every single individual that we hire as a general manager, right? It goes back to what I was saying before. Yes, I want to provide value to my customers, but if I'm providing that value, then, they are willing to pay for that value. And so that will, should translate into business results. And so thinking about that results and thinking about that through line, certainly something that, I think both my experience at Workday and at Platform helped to ingrain in me. And then lastly, I'll say, maybe being agile and adaptive, right? And that maybe doesn't come from the cost or the company so much as I built platforms, right? If you think about big data analytics and my role in analytics at Workday, part of it is listening to customers, seeing what they're doing, and also being willing to adapt based on the usage patterns that you see your platform starting to have. And I think that, kind of pattern of being agile, or that willingness to be agile and adaptive, has translated well back to this year of efficiency, right? And as I've talked to product leaders, right, it's not just me and Zuck, as I've talked to folks, through Products That Count, for example, and the amazing, people that I've been able to have on that webinar, I hear them too, right? That you cannot just stay so rigid and focused on the strategy that you started this year with. You absolutely have to be agile and adaptable. Otherwise, you will risk failure. And so I think, those are some of the things that I certainly take away from me, from just my general product experiences and these, incredible companies that I've been lucky to be a part of.
Any examples or anecdotes that you recall from Workday of where it's just kind of a special company? They do things there a little different. You're talking to a bunch of entrepreneurs. I would love to have them learn from any advice that you have where they could learn to be as great as a company like Workday.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to those customers, and I'll say, I had a quite a charge, which was, take this company that they acquired, Platform, and launch a product in a year that really helped to bring external data into Workday. Because you could imagine, if I want to figure out how long does it take to hire somebody on average, well, that works well if I'm using all the Workday suite, but what if I'm using a different applicant tracking system? So I have to have my non-Workday data and my Workday data to actually make data-driven decisions. And so as I went through that, obviously the rest of the team, the Platform team, went through that exercise, what I quickly found was our partners were incredible partners. And that is because of the investment that Workday has made with those partners. And I was able to get rapidly educated on the use cases that they saw, and they were willing to spend incredible amounts of time with me. And certainly that comes in exchange for you keeping them close, right? And helping them to get first access on information, and really to help include them to say, what are the things that matter to you? What are you hearing from your customers? And so I think that was certainly unique and distinct. And again, I'll go back to, I mentioned it before, but the customer centricity and this pleasure of working with all of these amazing customers. But I had a customer group, and those individuals, our customers, would meet every 4 to 6 weeks and really give us a lot of advice and guidance on the product that we were building. And part of that was, hey, what's the expectation that we set with them up front? And a big part of that expectation was, our goal is to help make you successful, right? And in exchange, right, we want your feedback, and we really need your time in order to get that feedback in enough detail so that we can build the product you need. And I think really Workday has done a great job of building strong partner community and really building that strong customer community. And so I'd say to anybody else out there, right, those are big critical investments, especially as you scale, that you should think about, because it certainly pays dividends to make sure you're building the right thing and you're not building in a vacuum.
Denise, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate you coming and hanging out, and we are all rooting for you and Checkr to succeed.
Thank you so much, Dan. It was truly my pleasure. And I can't wait to hopefully see even more Checkr customers as they hear how, we're making hiring both fair and fast.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.